Thank you so much. It's great to be back. It's great to have heard so many people over the last couple of days with accents. I feel completely at home because this has been a bit the bane of my existence until I moved to New York and met Henry Kissinger, and he told me never to worry about my accent because I can never underestimate in American public life the advantages of complete and total incomprehensibility. So I'm so happy to be talking about the third metric because, in a way, it has been part of my whole life's journey. But now it has a new resonance because of the new listening that's out there. Because when I started writing about these things, back to my mother, it all started with her. When I was a teenager living in Athens, she had me initiated by Maharishi, who came to Athens for a visit. My mother thought it would be very good for you to learn to meditate. I was 13, because it will be easier for you to pass your exams. That was her explanation. And other mothers would call her their children when they were in college to ask them any number of things. My mother would always be asking me, are you meditating? So she always kind of knew the value. So in my 20s, I wrote a book called After Reason about the need to integrate a spiritual dimension in our culture. The book was rejected by 36 publishers before it was finally published and sold, I think, maybe 3 copies. Clearly, nobody here has heard of it. Then I kept writing other books, many of which succeeded. Whenever I would turn back to this subject, as I did then in 1994 with a book called The Fourth Instinct, again, it was a complete flop. The Fourth Instinct was about the instinct that goes beyond our first 3 instincts of survival, sex, and power. It was the instinct that drives us to meaning, transcendence. And it's an instinct that is now, finally, much more at the forefront. To go back to the Greeks, the Greek philosophers had asked 3 main questions. How do we govern the city? What do we need to know? And how do we lead the good life? And then somehow we forgot about the third question, and people started defining the good life in terms of success, and defining success in terms of 2 metrics only: money and power. And so as I've been thinking about this subject all these years, I finally put it all together in a commencement speech that I gave at Smith last May, and which was all about the third metric. I told the Smith graduates that instead of just going out in the world and just trying to succeed in terms of that the world defines success, to also integrate in their journey the third metric, not to deny the first 2, but to include the third. And for me, the third metric, and I deliberately did not want to give it a name, because it will be manifested differently by each human being, but it includes 4 components. The first is our own health and well-being. You look around and you see a large number of very successful people with heart attacks in their 50s, with ulcers, with high blood pressure, diabetes, ignoring their own sense of well-being and health. The second is wisdom. We look around again and we see so many leaders so disconnected from their own wisdom. Very many very smart people with high IQs and great degrees making terrible decisions. Not because they're not smart, but because they're not wise. And technology here has been another major problem, because it's been fantastic, and I speak as somebody who runs a 24/7 digital operation, but it's also has made it easier for us to be distracted, addicted to our devices, and disconnected from ourselves. And especially among men, I have to say that to the men in this room, there's become a kind of equation between sleep deprivation and virility. You get men bragging about how little sleep they need. Literally, I had dinner with a guy the other day who bragged that he had only gotten 4 hours sleep the night before, and I thought to myself, I didn't say, but I thought, you know what? If you had gotten 5, this dinner would have been a lot more interesting. So then moving on to the third element of the third metric, which is our capacity to wonder at life, to bring joy into everything we do. I find it amazing how often we're just so blinkered that we miss out on what is happening around us and how much beauty there is around us. There was a blog that a parent wrote on the Huffington Post last week called "The Day I Stopped Saying Hurry Up" to my 6-year-old, and it's become a viral sensation. That was a mother who, like so many of us, always looks at her watch and feels that it's later than she thought, and she was communicating that to her child. And one day she realized how much harm she was doing to the child that was living in her own timeless rhythm. And somehow that resonated with millions of people in our digital world. And the final part of the third metric is service, compassion, giving back. Without these 4 elements, really success is like a two-legged stool. You're going to fall off at some point. It's not sustainable, to go back to sustainability. I had my personal wake-up moment in 2007 when I fainted from exhaustion, hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone, got 4 stitches on my right eye, and I felt it was one of those incredible blessings that got me to be really serious about this. And of course, to also bring it to the Huffington Post. So we have a dedicated sleep section. I'm now on the board of the Harvard School of Medicine Sleep Division, a third metric section, a good news section that focuses on only good news, and a what is working section that focuses on all the good things happening, on all the examples of ingenuity and creativity around the world, because I feel those of us in the media have a real responsibility, not just to write and expose corruption and what is dysfunctional, but to also put the spotlight on the good things happening. Because that's how we can help them scale. So we are very, very committed to that. And the great thing right now is that it's as though we're living in a split-screen world. And on one screen, you have what we're seeing around healthcare, with over 70% of healthcare costs going to preventable diseases. That could be changed if we live differently. We see what's happening in politics, where we somehow can only come up with suboptimal solutions to our deepest problems. We see what's happening in corporations with burned out executives, again and again making terrible decisions. There was an article recently in the New York Times by the former CFO of Lehman Brothers, writing about how she had sacrificed everything in her life, her marriage, her relationships, to her work. She was working around the clock. She describes her working life, which was basically dominated by being constantly on, and how this had destroyed her life and how she's now course-corrected. But the one thing she didn't say is that at the same time, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. So it's not like there she was, she destroyed her life, but she built this great company. That's what we need to realize. That when we lead sustainable lives, we're going to do a better job for our companies, for our countries, for the planet. In fact, as I said earlier, burnt out people are only going to produce a planet that's burning up. There's no question about it. We know what we need to do environmentally. Why aren't we doing it? That's really the central question we need to address here. And on the other side of the split screen, we have an amazing amount of awakening. 25% of American corporations right now have introduced some form of mindfulness program for their employees. And I don't mean just Google and Silicon Valley startups that are ahead of the time. I mean General Mills, Target, Aetna. I went to General Mills recently, and there I was walking down the hallways, and you saw executives coming out from a yoga class or a meditation class. That would have been unheard of 10 years ago. I was in Davos last year, and there was Mathieu Ricard, the fabulous, happiest man on earth in his Buddhist robes walking through the halls of Davos. There was Mark Williams, the clinical psychologist from Oxford, teaching CEOs to meditate. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago. So there is this amazing moment when all these trends are converging for a new listening. And to go back to my own journey, suddenly when I started talking about the third metric, there was a very different listening than in the 90s when I was talking about the fourth instinct. And when Mika Brzezinski and I organized a conference about the third metric in New York, originally Miri was there beautifully playing the violin. I love you, you're amazing. And there we were. I thought I was going to do it in my apartment. I thought it was going to be just the beginning of this movement and bring in people who had written and spoken about it. And I just said something about it on the Huffington Post, and I got inundated with emails from people saying, I'm also interested in this. I want to be there. So we still ended up having it in my apartment because I wanted it to be tribal. We had 340 people. We took out all the furniture. And we crowded in the apartment, and there was that sense that we all wanted to help each other, lead more humane, more sustainable lives, and in the process change the world. And that's really, for me, how it begins. And it goes back to what every major religion and every major scientist has really said, and that's why I love here bringing sages and scientists together. Archimedes, my Greek compatriot, put it in a way that I love, which was, give me a place to stand and I shall move the world. It's really the same thing as the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God is within. It's that place that we all know. It's a place of stillness, strength, peace inside each one of us. And it's a place from which we're constantly veering away, right? Isn't that the truth? We know we have it, but most of the time, we're not there. So how can we prioritize returning to that place again and again and again? There's no way we're going to be there all the time, right? Unless we are completely illuminated and enlightened and living on a mountaintop. The reality is that we're not going to eliminate stress. But we can actually so quickly course correct that we lead life from a different place. That's why we launched an app, I don't know if you've downloaded it, it's free, called GPS for the Soul. That gives you a proxy for your stress level, your heart rate variability, and then you launch a guide with the things that immediately help you get into a place of peace and stillness and serenity. In my case, my guide, which is public, includes a lot of pictures of my daughters when they were young and unproblematic a long time ago. Music, breathing exercises, whatever it is that gets you back to that place. I may use it multiple times a day because that renewal and recovery time has become so essential for me now that I prioritize it. And here is what is amazing. I'm much more effective and much more productive than I was before when I was operating from burnout, exhaustion, and sleep deprivation. That's what we need to make the world realize. We're not checking out. We are actually making ourselves much more creative and much more powerful to achieve whatever it is we want to achieve. So ultimately, this is the moment where we can really have a critical mass, bring about the transformation that so many of us here have been talking about. And for me, a critical mass is a scientific equivalent of grace. It means we do our part, and then grace is extended and does the rest. Otherwise, the job is too overwhelming to assume we are going to do it by ourselves. And that's why coming together here is just a moment for us to realize that by tapping into that place, supporting each other, and then spreading the word, we can bring about the fundamental change in ourselves that is ultimately the only way to bring about the fundamental change in the world. Thank you.